is what we could do. Now I think we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, good.
What did you do? So do you know what happened?
I didn't. I asked the computer to turn on the microphone.
That's a good thing to ask a computer. So okay, now after this bit of stress at the beginning, we can start. Thanks everyone for being patient and waiting for us. I'm really honored to have John Shipton joining us at this program tonight. Thanks, John.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Good evening.
So, the last time we saw each other was on that, actually the first time we met each other was on a train station in London when we took a train together to Belmarsh prison and visited Julian. That was the last time I saw him in November. Could you tell us when did you see Julian for the last time and how is the prison situation at this moment?
About 2 weeks ago, I saw Julian. He asked me to take extra precautions that I wouldn't get the virus and walk a lot and put on some weight to ensure that if I did get the virus, I had some reserves. We parted knowing that we wouldn't see each other for a month or so while the virus raged. Also, the jail has now stopped social visits, so we can't go there anyway. But to the circumstances in the jail, Julian is still brought to the meeting hall under controlled moves. That means that all of he's moved from his cell to a holding cell, and there he waits until all of the corridors to the meeting room are emptied so that he doesn't meet anybody on the way, and then taken into the meeting room. To get into the meeting room, if you're a visitor, as you remember, you have to go through 4 double portals, the last of which is a dog-smelling portal. The next is a portal to check your fingerprints. The previous portal to that x-rays your body and your clothes are searched, belt taken off, shoes taken off. And the portal previous to that is another fingerprinting portal. Each portal has double doors at each end. And the first registration, so there's 5 acts altogether of permission to get into this monstrous jail, is they take your fingerprints and you're issued with an ID card. So all your pockets are emptied, and if you're allowed to take in £20, which you can buy Julian a cup of coffee to have with his friends, as you and I did. So onerous circumstances, and these, when you in the meeting room itself, there are high fidelity cameras and high definition cameras and high fidelity voice recordings. So the meeting room has about, I don't know, 100 people in it, and the audio quality is very poor, so you can have great difficulty in hearing each other speak or what each other says.
Yeah, but unfortunately, this was, in some sense, a fortunate situation that you could, and also his lawyers and other visitors at least, visit him. But now this situation also changed. Could you tell us what happened yesterday at the UK court and why did the UK court, although it's obvious from all over the world, even the UN, the World Health Organization, everyone is urging governments to release the prisoners or at least to protect them. Why did what happened yesterday at the court, and why did they deny bail to Julian?
Well, they of course, you know, the oppression of the judiciary by the United States is continuous and has been demonstrated in the 4 or 5, 6, 7 court appearances Julian has had. I await for the penny to drop on the magistrates in the extradition court, that they're just simply being used and manipulated into rejecting every humanitarian and human rights obligation that the court has and that the United Kingdom has in order to service the judicial abduction of Julian to the United States. The court hearing yesterday was for a bail application to Julian to come and live with me and his partner, or just his partner, whatever the court decided. And there were sureties from Julian's uncle and Julian's auntie who live here. They're the British citizens, myself, his children are here. His situation is secure in as much as that there's nowhere for Julian really to go. No, all the airports are shut down, so it's impossible to travel. You can't get away. That bail application was rejected. The United States prosecutor said that the human rights obligations of the United Kingdom don't apply. Can you believe that? The human rights obligations of the United Kingdom don't apply to a person who's in danger of catching COVID-19 in a maximum security prison, a remand prisoner who has committed no crime in the United Kingdom. And the United States prosecutor says the human rights provisions don't apply to Julian. It's just disgraceful.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, what happened yesterday in London, I think it's a scandal. It became so obvious that it's an erosion of democracy, erosion of human rights. And we are in a situation, I've been looking at the numbers a bit. So according to the data, there is around 11 million people in the world who are in prison at this moment. Many of them did serious offenses and crimes, unlike Julian, who didn't kill anyone, who didn't harm anyone. And these numbers also show that around 20 million people are in one way or the other connected to the prison system, which means the employees, the families, all people who visited the prisons and so on, food delivery, everything. And you have, at the same time, when this scandalous decision happened, yesterday in the UK, in the court denying bail, although as you explained, Julian couldn't escape anywhere because everything is anyhow shut down already. At the same time, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and the World Health Organizations are urging governments to protect the prisoners or even to release them. So obviously, anyone who followed this case closely of your son can see that there is something much more darker going on, to put it like that. There is a reason why they want to isolate him even more, why they want to silence him even more. Although I think Julian is definitely not the person who deserved it. And actually these days I've been going on the WikiLeaks page a bit and researching about viruses. And I was surprised to find out how many documents WikiLeaks published on swine flu, Ebola, the bird flu. Even WikiLeaks released that during the time of the so-called avian flu, the bird flu, it is the Polish government which infected homeless people in order to test a vaccine. So I think WikiLeaks was actually showing us also what is happening with the viruses. And in this kind of situation, if anyone's voice is missed, it is definitely Julian's voice. So perhaps could you tell us how was he doing when you last met him 2 weeks ago? As you said, he suggested you to take care of yourself, which is also what I often experience with him, that he takes care of other people more than about himself, you know, even in this kind of difficult situation.
Julian is a warm, sweet and thoughtful man. And you can tell that, you get insight into that by what WikiLeaks publishes and the integrity of the WikiLeaks organization. The European Council issued a request that Julian be freed from and the extradition not go ahead. The UN has, under two of its auspices, the rapporteur of torture and the working group on arbitrary detention, have made declaration after declaration backed by factual information that the extradition would be stopped, and Julian has been in arbitrary detention now for many years. Started off, if I could run through it, because it's always worthwhile to review. If the first was no bail, 10 days solitary confinement in Wandsworth prison. The second was 18 months house arrest in Norwich. The third was 7.5 years in the Ecuadorian embassy. And the fourth was the last 11 months in maximum security prison, all of which in sum total, the 10 years, are arbitrary detentions. Julian has committed no crimes. In the Swedish matter, the cases had 4 prosecutors and the case was dropped 3 times, abandoned 3 times, just a scandal. In the United Kingdom's case, there is a conspiracy between the Crown Prosecuting Service and the Swedish Prosecuting Authority, documented. We have the documents. We've sent the documents to Australian politicians so that they may act in defence of their citizen, Julian Assange. This is all documented. The disgrace, the conspiracy to overcome their own laws is documented. So I harp on about it a bit in order to bring it, to refresh everybody's mind that this is an ongoing injustice which has brought shame and disgrace to the United Kingdom's Service of Justice and the Swedish Service of Justice. Just to add to a little bit, so in 790 years ago, the English peoples made a great gift to civilizations throughout the world. They placed a shield between the sovereign or the state and the people. And that shield works both ways, for the people and for the sovereign. And this great civilizational gift has been progressively abandoned in the case of Julian Assange and his matter. Progressively abandoned the greatest gift of civilization that the English people have given, a shield between the people and the sovereign, or the people and the state. Very, very great tragedy.
You mentioned the conspiracy between UK and Sweden. Let me just tell you that we will have, fortunately, one of the best of Italy's investigative journalists, Stefania Maurizi, in one of the next episodes. She was the one who revealed it. You can follow her on Twitter, check it out. But it proves precisely what you said, that there is a deep conspiracy and injustice happening to Julian. But to be a bit more precise, and then maybe later we can also talk about Julian himself and WikiLeaks and the philosophy behind it and what it means for freedom of press. But maybe just to stay a moment at what happened yesterday, could you perhaps, I mean, what you can reveal us, what are the next steps? Is the legal team going to appeal? Is this going to a higher court? And also what is going to happen to the planned extradition hearing end of May, June? Because everything is closed. The witnesses from the United States obviously cannot come to United Kingdom. I mean, even in this perspective, this decision of yesterday looks even more unjust because they know pretty well that nothing is functioning normally as it did, you know, and they still pretend as if everything is normal. But to come back to the question, if you could just tell us what are the next steps?
I expect that there will be a judicial application or appeal for a judicial review in the High Court, and the High Court will be more cognizant of what is just and humane and appropriate. They have the stature to assert the rights of justice without fear of being contradicted by a higher court. So I expect that it'll go to judicial review in the High Court, and that Julian will be able to come home to his family and be able to join you and I. Well, if we can, if we can get to, well, we can sit 6 feet apart, you know, and
yes, I mean, I'm just all the time during this coronavirus crisis, I'm thinking about the fact that Julian went through all of this, and even worse, much worse than what the majority of the world population is going through with isolation and self-isolation. I mean, he was forced, as you already described, to take refuge and political asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy, where he stayed more than 7 years in isolation. We can even walk around. He couldn't even do that. But when I'm looking also at this screen, I can see that we are using Zoom as a platform. And let me tell you that the first time I heard about this technology was from Julian. You know, he was one of the first among any of my friends who started to use Zoom. So maybe I wanted, and he was the one who actually really was experienced in this kind of live transmission, and also even out of isolation to act and to have an influence on the world which is outside. I mean, he did that. Now, unfortunately, he can't, but as you, I also hope he will be free. But I have a question looking at Zoom and his self-isolation and so on. Could you perhaps go back and maybe tell us what shaped Julian's philosophy, you know, back from the times in Australia and then moving to Europe and so on? Because he obviously always had a very deep understanding of technology, geopolitics, an understanding of the world which looks at the world as a big picture. Could you perhaps, as his father, tell us what shaped him? How did he come to founding something as WikiLeaks?
That's an interesting question. I don't really know. He called in one day and said that he wanted to start a wiki that would be called WikiLeaks, and that would protect people by using Tor, protect their anonymity if they wish to make leaks. We always chatted about the shape and form of the world, but we didn't have access to the sort of information that was in the cables that gave us all of the world an insight into how the geopolitical world was held, and how it was disposed, and how those within it those that composed were bribed or bullied or seduced into putting the United States before their own countries. So that was, we didn't have that sort of information, although Julian did, in his hacking days, discover the targeting procedures of certain generals in the United States Army, and those targeting procedures included the phrase, "The Iraqi people must feel the pressure of war." So you know what that, of course, means, that they, in the case of Baghdad, they blew up a shelter with killed 356 women and children. So that insight, also a very powerful sense of, well, justice I felt from him, and a determination to see justice done. The awful irony is that his determination to see some justice done came true. For example, the Chagos Islanders were able to pursue in the International Court of Justice the removal of they were removed from their land, all of them, and taken to Mauritius. And with the help of the cables, they were able to win their case against the United Kingdom for the dispossession of their homes. So there are many other examples where Julian and WikiLeaks were enabled people to have justice. The awful irony is that Julian himself has not been able to have justice. Terrible irony.
Yes, I'm thinking about the current moment, which is this global pandemics. And you probably came across a text by Slavoj Žižek, a Slovenian philosopher who visited Julian several times at the Ecuadorian embassy, who said, wouldn't it be great in this moment of a global pandemics to have a Chinese Julian Assange? You know, he put this metaphor, but in the sense to get the leaks about what is happening actually today. Because, I mean, what Julian did and what WikiLeaks did and is still doing is precisely to pull off the masks of the corrupted governments, companies, secret services, who I am sure are already also using this current situation for their secret plans. And I was really surprised when I searched on WikiLeaks again and found a document which goes back as 2009, which speaks about the United States wanting to import the genomes of viruses such as Ebola and Marburg. So that's a document from 2009, you know, so wouldn't it be very useful for all of us, especially who are now in quarantine and worried about the future, to have similar information about the coronavirus, and not to mention Julian's thoughts about in which direction long-term this goes.
Yes, I often, well, I believe that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are a necessity. Just another example is the dumping of e-waste off the coast of Africa by Trafigura, which ruined these people just doing this to make a few bob to buy Cristal champagne instead of Prosecco. You know, they ruined the lives of the coastal villages by dumping poisonous waste off the coast. And Julian and WikiLeaks brought that to our attention and enabled pursuit of those who committed these crimes. So an absolute necessity is the functions of WikiLeaks in this age.
John, there is a question coming from the people who are watching. And one of the questions is, which might be connected precisely what we were mentioning now. The question is, how is propaganda changing now and going to change after coronavirus?
Well, you know, it's very hard to do. It seems that the coronavirus has driven us, all of us, to communicate over the internet and read voraciously on the internet to sort out what's believable or against what is simply propaganda. So for myself, it's 2 hours every day I read various reports on the internet to attempt to make sense of what is best to do, whether it's good to meet people, whether, you know, to wash your hands or to get in a stock of chloroquine or whatever. So I feel that we'll begin to further abandon the legacy media.
Which again brings us back to Julian. I remember one conversation we had at the embassy during those days when it was still possible to visit him. And he described, it was in the morning, he described how he, quote unquote, hacked his way out of Australia. And that meant, he said, you know, I was feeling kind of intellectually isolated. You know, Australia is a big land. I was moving all the time when I was a child and so on. And he said, I hacked my way out of Australia through the internet. And then he said, you know, this was the early days of the internet in the late 70s, early 80s. And then, of course, the 90s start, but in the 80s. And he said that was the way through which I was getting to connect to people around the world who think in a similar way like me. And I like, you know, I really love that because he's the one who understood internet as a possible emancipatory tool very early. You know, even when you read Edward Snowden's recent memoir, the first 2 or 3 chapters, and he was born in 1983, so he's a bit younger than Julian, actually my age, 83, not 83, but born in 83. And Snowden talks there about the early internet, you know, the internet where everything seems possible, where, you know, you could connect to people. It is not commodified yet. It is not owned by huge companies who then use it for advertisement or for manipulating elections or other reasons. And also, I think what you could have seen with Julian during those years is how he developed a very deep understanding of technology. His book, When WikiLeaks Met Google, I think, is still, unfortunately, an underestimated book because, of course, it's in no one's interest to promote that book because it's still a very subversive book. But then he shows, and that's also what WikiLeaks revealed later, is the interconnection, the interplay between technology, Silicon Valley giants, and politics. So could you perhaps talk about that? How do you think in this current moment we might redefine or rediscover the potentialities of the internet? And come back to some ideas of Julian.
Well, the internet is a wonderful engineering marvel, and it has facilitated the means whereby people all over the world can speak to each other on social media and exchange ideas. The administration of those companies that use that own social media, if you can own it, of course, that their administration has been poor. In my own country, Australia, Google harvests massive amounts of data, but there are privacy protections, but they are not enforced by the government. So the administration of this wonderful attributes is a deficiency in our governments, which can be rectified quite simply. We just need to insist that our data is ours. These are in Israel, and I think in South Korea, Singapore, the information on your telephone as you move from tower to tower or cell to cell is used to track where you are and if you're infected, if you have COVID. Consequently, this introduction of these regulations and administrative regulations has allowed the sort of insight into our doings and the supervision of what we do by the state at an extraordinary level, absolutely extraordinary level. Every relationship you have is in time and space recorded by the government. The government has access to it to do whatever they wish. This is very worrying, very worrying. And so, how can I say? I can't tell the future myself. I've got no idea. But it's very rare that anxious governments, and I've never seen a secure state in my life, but anxious governments will use these attributes to service their own ends. So that, of course, is a great problem. Also, it's becoming quite common now for even, say, a PR firm. You can go to a PR firm in Australia and they will have methods of sorting data, and so that you can perceive people's habits and stimulate them in a certain direction. So these are problems that we face in the future. But my current job, I have to reiterate, my current job is really quite narrow. That is to do everything I can to ensure that Julian comes home to his family and to his friends. That's my job. In order to do that, I have an understanding. And this understanding is that the United States has 3 avenues of action. First is the oppression of publishers, the oppression of publications, the oppression of journalists, the intimidation of those journalists, and the intimidation of the publishers and publications. That's one avenue. The second avenue is the judicial abduction of people who have technical capacities that the United States wants. And the examples are Meng Wanzhou from Huawei, Ola Bini is an internet genius in Ecuador, and Mike Lynch in the United Kingdom. So that's the judicial abductions. The third avenue, if I could make it plain, is the assassinations of those, the extrajudicial assassination of people. The last great example was General Soleimani. People, that's not isolated. During Obama's tenure, the 8 years, there were just over 400 people assassinated extrajudicially on the Tuesday kill list. So third generalization, if I can say so, is that this is done in order to cause Europeans to be unable to adumbrate, to get at facts for themselves and have discussions amongst themselves, to see where the United States or their own government's involvement with the United States in the plunder of Europe. Very simple. So that's my job, to point out to the Europeans that it's in their own interests to unify and to insist that these intimidation of publications and journalists doesn't happen, in their own interests. It's equally in their own interests to insist that the plunder of their technical knowledge doesn't happen. It's equally in their interests to unify and ensure that judicial assassinations stop. So that's my job. The technical aspects of the weave and weft of the internet moving into society and shaping us through techniques is way out of my remit, except to say that I take Heidegger's analysis of the effect of techniques upon us, that it's made us into a pathocracy where pathological social arrangements emerge very easily, mediated conversation instead of the warmth and feel of two people or three people gathered together. The mediated, the distance, everything is distant between us. So they're general observations, philosophical observations that I like. However, that's not my remit. My remit is to remind people that Julian is banged up, it's an injustice, and it's in their interests to ensure that Julian is freed and to ensure that no other journalist suffers in the way Julian has in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I would have loved to talk to you about Heidegger, of course, and you also know his last Spiegel interview, which was published after his death, when he was asked a question about technology and where the world is going. He answered, "Nur noch ein Gott kann uns retten." Only a God can save us if this is going in that direction. But as you said, this is dedicated to Julian, so we might have this discussion in hopefully together with him.
Yes,
we had many philosophical discussions with him for hours, and he was reading everything and following everything. But to come back to the questions which some people have, and I think this is a very important question. I can see many people are posing it. The supporters of Julian want to know how can they practically help today in this changed situation, both his situation, but also the situation of many people in the world due to coronavirus. So what are the concrete things people could do to help support you, his legal team, and Julian himself?
Well, they're good questions. One is to talk to each other so that you can analyze and get knowledge of where the situation actually is at the time. So conversation is the first, or reading what is written by each other is the first. Second is, after that, to join forums where the insights that people have can be analyzed and taken by each other. Very important thing. There's nothing more important than to be able to speak to each other and get insights into what's doing. The third is to join with, is to support the DEA, in England, and the Assange campaign.org.au in Australia. They're activists who are preparing, for example, they prepare letters to parliamentarians. So far, I might tell you that 10,000 emails from individual people have gone to Foreign Minister Maurice Payne of Australia, 10,000. That's just by people going to assangecampaign.org.au and sending an email under their own name, their own email address. And that's sent to Maurice Payne and their local member. Really important stuff. Seems simple, but it mounts up, you know. There's, you know, a lake is just full of raindrops.
There is another question asking, why do you think the press, the journalists, failed so badly in the past years when it comes to defending Julian Assange and his freedom?
Well, you know, the governments of the United Kingdom and Sweden and the United States and to some extent Australia brought about a campaign. Newspapers have two functions, you know, generally. One is to bring about, well, this is my opinion anyway, one is to bring about public unity behind policy positions. So this is really important aspect of administration if you're a government, to get the people to support the policy so it can be enacted. If the people don't support it, the policy just fades away and the organizational capacity of the state is reduced. So in order to continue their support from government, newspapers will obey to a certain extent what the government wants, and that was the destruction of the popularity of Julian Assange. And so they, you know, they did that over mobbing and calumny after calumny, lie after lie, even to the extent of putting a lie on the front page of one popular left-wing newspaper in the United Kingdom. But with the extradition process, as journalists throughout the world have realized that their prestige as journalists protects them. And if they can be easily judicially kidnapped or abducted, as I call it, then their safety is gone. And so Julian is an icon of that, that if they can protect Julian, then they can protect themselves. If they can't protect themselves, they're gone. They're just become ciphers. They just can be fired at will. At any rate, that's how I see it currently.
Mm-hmm. If I may just add something to it, I would say that what really changed this year, and unfortunately this global pandemic happened, is what you could have seen at the last big protest in London. You know, there were never so many people on the streets for Julian, thousands of them. What you could have seen this year during these months is that I think even many people who didn't realize it before or were reluctant to join the struggle to get Julian out of prison are now realizing it, and there are many more supporters. We could have seen Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders, many respected world institutions who are now standing in defense of Julian. So in that sense, I think this really changed in the last months. You know, I think that the support network was never bigger, actually, although we find ourselves now in this new and complex situation that people cannot even travel and we are home in self-isolation. But I think this is a brilliant chance actually to dig into WikiLeaks, to visit the DAA campaign, to visit Courage Foundation as well. I think Courage Foundation
yes.
has very relevant information. And I think there are many things people could actually do, as you already said.
Just when you mentioned that, the support, there's, you know, the support comes from the mass, as it does in most things. The mass invents that. So the support for Julian has been a wonderful upwelling from the mass into, which is of course the internet and newspapers and journalists. So a tremendous upwelling of support, of a historical realization that this is a monumental injustice, and an injustice to them too. So from the mass rises up and then is articulated. It comes from the mass, if I may say. We stand on the shoulders of our fellow men and women. And if we are sincere and our observations hold true, we articulate the feelings and the upwelling of support for Julian that I've found right across Europe, in amongst every man and amongst parliamentarians, journalists, bureaucrats. It's just been wonderful, powerful, and I feel that we will succeed.
I very much hope so as well. And I'm convinced that we will continue doing our best. I mean, this is also an attempt to reach the people who are at their homes and who very often, I think, also feel helpless, thinking that if such a person as Julian, who was so powerful, is in this situation now, I think many people underestimate their own power, what you just said, that if they come together, they might be more powerful. So we are slowly coming to an end. I can see there are some other questions, but we are almost finished with this episode, unfortunately. Maybe John, tell us what is happening now with the extradition court hearing in May or June. Is this still going to happen? What can we do?
Well, I don't, I can't. I'm not in a position to tell the future, but it looks as though the hearing can't possibly go ahead because of all of the witnesses, 16, or there's 22 altogether, but many of them have to come from the United States. So it's simply out of the question for the moment. Also, one can't tell what's going to happen in the United Kingdom as to COVID-19. But I feel that the quality, the fraudulent quality of the United States request, the extradition request, is becoming apparent to everybody. And the extradition request itself will be dropped, and that would be the most sensible thing for the United Kingdom to do in the position they find themselves now. Complete disarray, economic, I'm not going to say collapse, but economic difficulties, and the persecution and prosecution of a journalist, which is to the embarrassment of the United Kingdom's justice system throughout all of Europe, as was the Swedish prosecuting authorities embarrassed Sweden, and Sweden often now is thought of a place of an embarrassing or deficient justice system and sells junk furniture, whereas in the 1960s it was considered a model society. I wouldn't want that to happen to the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I also think that the United Kingdom still has a chance to save their name, if anything is left of the name. But I hope that the judges on some other court or higher court might be smarter and more humane and more just than the current court, which denied bail. So besides writing letters to the MPs, not only in Australia, but I would also add in any country where you are at the moment, and especially in the UK, perhaps for the end, John, could you also tell us what are the other means or other steps we could take to help your son?
Well, you know, donations, of course, are important. Just quickly, there's over 100 lawyers working on this. There's 100,000 people worldwide working on it. They're in 4 jurisdictions. So donations are absolutely vital, and they're for the Courage Foundation and the DEA. So please give, it helps a lot.
I can only underline this. This time, don't donate to DiEM25, although we've been doing our best to support Julian for years. He was one of the early members of DiEM25, but please donate to the legal team of Julian Assange. It is really helpful. I think this is the biggest legal action in recent human history, you know, to save someone's life.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
John, thanks a lot for being with us. Take care. You are not alone. We are here. Many people are with us. It is in this kind of, I would rather be with you in a warm room, but we will do it soon.
Thank you. Thank you, and good night, everybody.
Good night, John. See you soon.
See you soon.